So, what's with all this hype over Dwarf Fortress? If you've not played the game yourself, if you're not familiar with the game, you're probably wondering why a colony manager is so exciting to people. Why is there so much hype? It's hardly unusual. You get some dwarves, you dig underground, you fight monsters, you build armies, you try and stop them from starving. What is it that's so unique about Dwarf Fortress that it creates so much hype? Well, Dwarf Fortress has something unique. It has a fully simulated world. And to help understand how impactful that is, I'm going to tell you a little story. And this is a story that predates the beautiful graphics that you see in front of you. It's back in the time of ASCII Dwarf Fortress, where I played with a tile set. And it's a story of a ruin that my dwarves tried to reclaim called Painted Road. The first thing that we did was to generate a world. That world, before we joined, was 250 years old. As the game generated the world, it simulated 250 years of history. There were 100,000 or more individual people, each with their own lives and goals, their own fears, their own ambitions. Each individual person in that world was simulated. 250 years on, I generated a group of 7 dwarfs, and we went off to go and try and reclaim a previous dwarven fortress that was lying in ruins. There was something about that place that looked unusual, and I wanted to know a little more about it. My 7 dwarves arrived, and within the first day, all were dead. Here's the story of Painted Road. We're going to start today's episode by looking in Legends mode at the history of Lugen-Toulon, Painted Road. And this place has a very interesting history. So this is the evil ruin that our group, the Bane of Ancients of the Solitary Road, went and reclaimed in the year 250. And it withered pretty much immediately. And before we go and attempt to take it back again, I wanted to know, what's the history of this place? And oh boy, does this place have a story. It was founded in the year 79 by the Gilded Sharks. The Guild of Sharks is a local civilization of dwarves. They set up the Courageous Vault, the local government of Painted Road. The first leader of the Courageous Vault, Nomal Bridgeburied. She's a very interesting character. She was born in the year 61, just a girl from the hillocks. She fought in lots of battles for the Gilded Sharks, and she was made the leader of Painted Road in the year 79. In the year 104, she left Painted Road, and she moved to Banner Judged, which is the mountain home where the Guild of Sharks rule from. She was involved in lots more battles, with lots more outlaws. She was a good soldier. Just under 40 years later, she settled in a tower called Cult Glazed, where she learned to become a necromancer. She was in Cult Glazed for a little over 10 years, when the humans of the Puce Unions destroyed the tower and enslaved her. She was held in the hamlet of Shopbrushes, where she became part of the government eventually, and she held a notable position for 30 years. Then she moved on from Shopbrushes to a monastery called Pepper Seasons, where she started by writing books. But then she began her espionage. She developed a network of agents and placed them throughout various locations run by the Guild of Sharks. And then in the year 220, she went back to Banner Judged, and she staged a coup on the Guild of Sharks, overtaking them and becoming their queen, and quite a tyrannical queen at that. So most of the time that Nomal Bridgeburied was having her adventures, Painted Road was leading quite a quiet existence. But then in the year 207, while Nomal was still in the monastery, Painted Road got caught up in the squeezing conflict of slings. A huge war that the Oily Trenches raged on the Guild of Sharks. The story of the Oily Trenches starts when the daughter of a necromancer, Iden Rampart Drills, was born in the year 37. She'd grown up in Fence Machine, a fortress run by the Guild of Sharks. In the year 123, she left Fence Machine and moved to a tower called Diamond Kindle, where she learnt to become a necromancer. But 8 days later, Diamond Kindle was destroyed and she was enslaved by the Puce Unions. Yep, that's these guys again. And she was taken to the castle, Mergecharm. She settled into Mergecharm and became part of the local government. But she was convicted of embezzlement and had to flee, and she went back to Fence Machine, where she'd grown up. She settled down again in Fence Machine, where she became a good soldier and she was involved in lots of battles. But by the year 183, the people of Fence Machine had started to notice that she wasn't aging, and it aroused their suspicions, and so she had to flee once again. She hid out in the Swamp of Roughness and formed the Oily Trenches and built the Tower Pass Page, from where she built her army of abominations, and other necromancers came and studied under her. And this is where the Oily Trenches crosses paths with Painted Road, because in the year 207, the Oily Trenches launched their war on the Guild of Sharks, and they conquered a number of the Guild of Sharks sites, including Painted Road. During the battle for Painted Road, a number of the residents were experimented on by Nish Inkburned, who was a student of Iden Rampart Drills. Remember Nish Inkburn's name, it'll become relevant later. The remaining residents of Painted Road formed a band of refugees and fled to the steamy mire. The Oily Trenches formed a government called the Curls of Wire to take over Painted Road, but they didn't last very long because the Rows of Tribes, the elven allies of the Guild of Sharks, turned up at Painted Road with an army of 6,000, just too late to save the residents. They defeated the Curls of Wire, but they pillaged Painted Road. The Guild of Sharks turned up 8 days later and slew the remaining members of the Curls of Wire in the second conquest of Painted Road. Iden Rampart Drills was captured the year later by the Rows of Tribes and was sentenced to death by being fed to beasts. Nish Inkburnt was captured by the goblins during the war and was taken to Combine Poisons, where he's still held to this day. The Guild of Sharks placed Shorast Fight Cudgel in charge of Painted Road and named the new government the Torch of Entangling. Her reign wasn't a happy time for Painted Road. Members of the local religion, the Luxurious Sect, were persecuted on her order, and the marketplace, the Gilded Oat, was destroyed. Meanwhile, another war was brewing. In a familiar story, Rigoth Painted Last, a dwarf from Gorge Mansion, a fortress held by the Solitary Road, which is our civilization. She also became a necromancer, and she was also enslaved by the Puce Unions after the tower where she was studying was destroyed, but she escaped to Shootbeans, a mountain hall held by the Solitary Road. She'd settled in Shootbeans for several years, but eventually she started to arouse suspicion because she'd never aged. She wandered the nearby jungles of Severity, where she formed the Treaties of Kindling and built a tower called Room Grasping. And in the year 218, only 11 years after Shorast's Fight Cudgel had taken over the Painted Road, the Treaties of Kindling attacked. They defeated Shorast's government of the Torch of Entangling in the third conquest of Painted Road. They drove out Shorast and the remaining survivors, who formed a band of refugees and fled to the mountains of the Beak of Clashing. Rigoth set up the local government of the Branded Diamonds to run Painted Road, and she placed Adil Bridgebeans in charge. He was a dwarf that she'd resurrected 28 years earlier. But then the Rows of Tribes, the elven allies who'd driven out the Oily Trenches 11 years earlier, came to the rescue. They attacked with 6,700 soldiers and beasts of war against 200 defenders of the Treaties of Kindling, and they were victorious in the fourth conquest of Painted Road. Adil Bridgebeans was shot in the battle, and Rigoth Painted Last was captured and executed by drowning. This time, the Rows of Tribes placed Nathitha Eaglewets in charge of the local government, the Tufted Tornadoes. Nathitha settled in Painted Road and she married there. The marketplace, the Gilded Oat, was rebuilt, and many counting houses were established as Painted Road prospered as a trading town. Many people came and settled, including a dwarven vampire called Mesthor Roserag. But there's always a necromancer somewhere nearby who's been enslaved by the puce unions and had to flee to the jungles of Severity. And this time it was Thob Lance Trusses, the son of a monk and a farmer. While wandering the jungles of Severity, Thob Lance Trusses formed a group called the Born Calm and built a tower called Champets. And in the year 249, just 6 months before our party arrived, and 31 years into Nathitha's reign, the Born Calm attacked the Painted Road. The dwarven vampire Nestor Roserag led the defence, but he was struck down by a dog, along with 7 other defenders. The survivors, including Nathitha, fled as refugees to the Steamy Mire. The Born Calm were the victors of the 5th conquest of Painted Road, and they formed a local government called the Hammers of Fording. Thob Lance Trusses placed in charge a goblin called Ampsu Named Horrors, who he'd resurrected only a few weeks earlier. And once again the Rose of Tribes came to the rescue of Painted Road and defeated the Hammers of Fording. Ampsu Named Horrors was killed for the 2nd time during the battle, and the Rose of Tribes pillaged Painted Road before moving on to destroy Thob Lance Trusses' tower Champets. They captured Thob Lance Trusses and executed him by drowning. And so Painted Road was left, ungoverned as a ruin inhabited by the things left over from war. And in the year 250, just 6 months after Painted Road had been abandoned, our little group of inadequately equipped and trained dwarves who called themselves the Bane of Ancients set off to reclaim Painted Road, and every one of them had died within a day of arrival. Well, I hope that has helped to convey the depth and richness of Dwarf Fortress. Remember, all of that story happened before we even joined the game. We joined in the aftermath of that story. So when you play Dwarf Fortress, all of this is going on around you while you're managing your little fortress. The things that happen in the world, they come and affect you. Sometimes you go out into the world and affect what's going on out there. Sometimes there are civilizations rising and falling, there are wars being fought, people are living and dying their lives, and you may never know about it. It may never affect you, it may be going on a different continent that you can't even reach. Dwarf Fortress is a game about stories. It's a game about living in a little corner of the world and tripping across the amazing things that are happening in other people's lives, some people who you may never even have met. I regularly stream Dwarf Fortress over on Twitch. If you'd like to know more, then come and join me. If you'd like to learn how to play Dwarf Fortress yourself, I have a tutorial series on this channel. However, it predates the Steam release. I will be updating those tutorials with the Steam release, but I'm going to give it a week or two to settle down before I start. The version that you're looking at on my screen now is a pre-release version, so I expect there'll be a few changes over the course of the first couple of weeks. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bye for now.